Welcome back, listeners, to Sandman Stories Presents, a folklore podcast where I read you to sleep or until the next story. I'm your host, Dustin. And if you'd like more of the spicy stuff, go and check out Sandman Stories After Dark. It's on Patreon, and you can join for as little as no money a month. So, see you over there. And a big shout out to Robin for joining at $10 a month. Wow. The fact that people will pay to listen to me still surprises me. And today we are back in the book of Canadian folklore written down by Cyrus McMillan. This episode will come out on Christmas, and it just so happens to star Old Saint Nick. Okay, let's begin. Saint Nicholas and the Children. 2 little children lived with their old grandmother in a remote place in the Canadian forest. They were twins, a boy and a girl, Pierre and Estelle by name, and besides their clothes, it was not easy to tell them apart. Their father and mother had died in the springtime, and in the summer they had left their old home because of all the sad memories, and had gone to live with their grandmother in a new home elsewhere. In this new forest home they were very poor, but they were not unhappy. Times were hard, and there was very little food to be had no matter how hard their old grandmother worked. But they caught fish in the streams, and gathered berries and fruit and birds' eggs on the wooded hills, and somehow, throughout the summer, they kept themselves from hunger. But when late autumn came, and the streams were frozen over, and the berries were all gone, and there were no eggs, for the birds had all flown south, they were often very hungry because they had so little to eat. Their grandmother worked so hard to provide for herself and the children, so that at last she fell very sick. For several days she could not leave her bed. She said, "I want meat broth to make me well, and I must have good meat to make it. If I do not get meat, I can have no broth. And if I do not get broth, I can't get well. And if I do not get well, I will die. And if I die, you 2 children will surely starve and die too. So meat and meat alone can save us all from starvation and death." So the 2 children, to keep themselves and their grandmother alive, set out one morning in search of meat to make the broth. They lived far from the other people, and they did not know where to go, but they followed the forest path. The snow lay deep in the ground, and sparkled brightly in the sunlight. The children had never before been away from home alone, and every sight was of great interest to them. Here and there a rabbit hopped over the snow, or a snowbird hovered and twittered overhead, all looking for food like the children. And there were holly berries growing in many places, and there was mistletoe hanging from the trees. And Pierre, when he saw the holly berries and the mistletoe, said, "St. Nicholas will be here soon, for the trees are dressed and ready for his coming." And Estelle said, "Yes, St. Nicholas will be here soon." And they were both very glad, thinking of his coming. As they went along in the afternoon, they came upon an old man sitting at the door of a small house of spruce boughs under the tree close to the forest path. He was busy making whistles, whittling willow wands with a knife, and tapping gently on the bark until the bark fell off from the wood and easily slipped off. The children stood and watched him at his strange work, for he had merry twinkly eyes, and a kindly weather-beaten face, and thick white hair, and they were not afraid. "Hello," said the old man. "Hello," said Pierre. "Why are you making willow whistles?" "I'm making them for St. Nicholas," said the old man. "He is coming soon for his yearly visit. Indeed, he is already in the land. When he makes his rounds, he always gives whistles, among other things, to good children, and I must have a great store of them ready for him when he comes, for there are many children to supply." Then he went on busily whittling with his knife. The children watched him for a long time in silence, and they thought, what a fine thing it must be to work like the old man for St. Nicholas in his little house of boughs under the forest trees. Then the man said, You are very small children. What are you seeking so far away from people?" And Estelle answered, "Our old grandmother is very sick, and we are looking for meat to make broth to make her well." The old man was sorry that he had no meat, for he lived on other food. He told them that some distance farther along there was a butcher who always kept meat. But the butcher, he said, was a very wicked fellow, and sometimes little children who entered his shop never came out again. The children were very frightened when they heard what the old man said, and they wondered if they had better go back home. But the old man thought for a long time in silence as he whittled his willow wands, and then he said, "I will give you each a whistle, and when you blow it, St. Nicholas will always hear it. You must never blow it except for when you are in great trouble or distress. And when St. Nicholas hears it, he will know that you are coming to grief or that harm is already upon you, and he will come himself or send someone to your assistance. But you must only blow one blast. The whistle should only be given by St. Nicholas himself when he comes at holly time into the land. But you are good children, and your old grandmother is sick, and you are trying to make her well. And I know that St. Nicholas will not say that I have done wrong." So he gave the children each a whistle, and then the fear left them, for they knew now no harm could come to them if they had the aid of St. Nicholas. It was growing late in the afternoon, and the children set out on their way to find the wicked butcher, but they had many misgivings. And as they went on, they grew faint of heart, for they wondered if the old man had told them the truth about the whistles, or if he was in reality a secret agent of the wicked butcher, trying to lure them to their death. They resolved to search for meat elsewhere, and to keep away from the butcher's shop. They searched for a long time, but without success. There was no meat to be had in all of the land, at any of the places that they stopped to ask. Soon they saw the butcher's shop. They were very frightened, but the sun had already gone down behind the trees, and night was coming on, and they still had no meat. And they knew that if their old grandmother was to get well, she must have meat to make the broth. The shop also looked welcoming and attractive on a cold winter evening. Warm light was shining from a fire through the door, and in the window were sausages, fat birds, and big yellow pumpkins and cakes with red berries on top. The children were hungry and wished for something to eat by the warm shop fire. They decided to enter the shop, notwithstanding their fear, to buy some food, and to get meat for their grandmother's broth as quickly as they could. But before they entered the shop, they thought it would be good, in order to be safe, to blow a blast on their whistle, as the old man had told them, so that St. Nicholas would know that they were in harm's way. They stood for a long time in the shadow of the great trees next to the door, and prepared to blow together. Pierre gave the signal, and blew a long, soft blast. But Estelle could not get her whistle from her pocket, and Pierre had finished his blast, all out of breath, before she was ready to blow. "Don't blow now," he said. "You are just like the rabbit, always too late." But blow she did, as the old man had told her, and before Pierre could stop her, she blew a long, soft blast on her whistle. Pierre was very cross, for he thought that now no good would come of it, as 2 blasts had sounded, but they entered the butcher's shop anyway. The wicked butcher was in his shop, but no one else was in the place. It was all very quiet. The man was very glad to see the children, and he seated them by the warm fire, and he gave them food, and although he shut the door tight behind them, their fear soon vanished. After they had eaten well and were warm again, they asked for meat to make the broth for their old grandmother, and the butcher said he would give them plenty of good meat, although it was very scarce in all the land. There was a barrel standing in one corner. In another corner was a large hogshead reaching almost to the ceiling, and the butcher said that both of these were full of meat. Now, the butcher was really the friend and partner of a wicked giant who lived in the forest. The giant's greatest delight was to eat little children. He liked nothing better than a meal of little children, 2 at a time, pickled first in brine. He always ate them when he could get them, but he was not always successful, for children were scarce in the land. He was a great hunter, and he was able to kill lots of animals in the forest, and to secure heaps of meat. He was so strong. Once a week he brought a great load of meat to the butcher, and traded it for any little children the butcher managed to entice into his shop. So the butcher got a lot of meat at a low cost, and the old man of the house of the bows was right when he said that many little children who entered the shop never came out again. The butcher was very glad when he saw the 2 pretty little children. He was expecting the giant that night for his weekly visit, and he thought gleefully of the great load of meat he would get from the giant in exchange for the children, for he would ask a big price, and he knew that the giant would give him all the meat he had for such a good meal. And he also thought of all the money he would get for the giant's load of meat. So he resolved to kill the children and pickle them in brine to await the giant's coming. When the children had finished their meal and had warmed themselves by the fire, they made ready to go home, and they asked for their meat. The butcher said he would get it for them. They looked up at the shelves, laden with more food than they had ever seen before, hams and cabbages and strings of onions. And the little children said, "There are good onions up there. We will buy some and take them home to our grandmother to put in her broth." The butcher said, "There are many kinds of onions in the box on the high shelf. You must pick out the kind you want. I will lift you up to the shelf so that you can see for yourselves." So he grabbed each of them by the coat between the shoulders, and because of his great strength, he lifted them high until they could look down into the box and pick out the onions they wanted. As he took them down, he thrust them straight out from his body at arm's length and held them there, and they laughed because of his great strength. Then he brought them together with a terrible force so that their heads struck one another, and they were stunned by the cruel blow. Then he threw them head first into the barrel in the corner, which was filled with brine, not with meat like he had said, and he left them to pickle there as well. He was greatly pleased with the fine load of meat he would get in exchange from the giant, who, he knew, would appear before long had passed. Soon the giant arrived. He carried a load of meat on his back, and he also drew a sled heavily laden with the carcasses of animals that he had killed. "What cheer for me tonight, and what fortune?" he said to the butcher as he entered the warm shop with his load. And the butcher said, "Good cheer and fine fortune. I have a good fat pear for you tonight, already pickling in the brine." Then he uncovered the barrel in the corner and showed the giant the 2 little children sticking headfirst into the pickle juice. The giant smacked his fat lips and chuckled and rubbed his great hands. So pleased was he with the sight of such a good meal. And he said, "We will let them steep well in the brine until tomorrow. I always like them very salty." They covered up the barrel, and then they haggled about the price of the meat. The giant agreed to give the butcher all of his meat in exchange for the children. Then they sat by the fire, drinking and eating, until far into the night. And the giant said that before they went to bed, he would like to take another look at the children to see how they were pickling. So they went and uncovered the barrel. Now it happened that St. Nicholas was in the land at that time, as the old man of the house of bows had said. He had come into the land to bring his yearly gifts to the little children. In the evening, he was many miles away from the butcher's shop, but he heard the long, soft blast of a whistle borne on the still evening wind. He knew it to be one of his own whistles, and it told him that little children were in danger. But it was followed by another soft blast, the late blast of Estelle's whistle, and the 2 blasts meant that the danger was not yet near to the children, that indeed it was far off. So he thought that there was no need to hurry to the children's aid. Moreover, St. Nicholas was just then leaving tiny little dolls for little babies in many little houses in the forest, and he decided to take his time and finish the giving of all these gifts before he set out to the place from which the whistle blast had come. At last he was able to go on his way. The snow lay deep in the forest, and traveling was hard, but the white winter moon was shining, and the path was bright, and St. Nicholas moved along quickly on his snowshoes. Far on in the night he reached the butcher's shop from where he knew the children's note of fear had come. As he entered the shop, the giant and the butcher were just taking their last look before going to bed at the children sticking in the barrel of brine. They did not know St. Nicholas, but when they saw him, they quickly placed the cover on the barrel and were very confused. St. Nicholas was suspicious that they were up to some wickedness, and he knew that, in some way or another, the barrel was connected with the dreaded harm the children's whistle had told him, and he thought that perhaps the children were hidden inside. So he said, "I have come for meat. I want meat that has been pickled in brine. I should like a piece from that barrel." But the butcher said, "It is not good meat. I have better meat in the inner room. I'll go get it for you." So the butcher and St. Nicholas entered the inner room and closed the door behind them, while the giant sat on the barrel in the corner, trying to hide it with his great furry legs. In the inner room was a barrel filled with brine, but only a small piece of meat at the bottom. St. Nicholas said he would take that piece. The butcher bent down far into the barrel to reach down in search of the meat. But as he did so, St. Nicholas picked him up by the legs and pushed him head first into the barrel of brine. He spluttered and kicked, but he stuck fast in the barrel, and he could not get out. St. Nicholas placed the cover on the barrel with a great weight on top of it, and that was the end of the wicked butcher. Then St. Nicholas returned to the shop where the giant was waiting, still sitting on the barrel. He told the giant that he wanted a piece of meat that lay in the bottom of the large hogshead of pickle in the other corner. He asked the giant to go get it for him, as the hogshead was so high that neither he nor the butcher could reach down into it. The giant bent far into the hogshead and began groping for the meat at the bottom. St. Nicholas took a large bone that lay on the floor, and standing on a box beside the hogshead, he struck the giant with a powerful blow to the head. The giant was only slightly stunned, but in his surprise he lost his balance and fell head first into the brine. He yelled and kicked for a time, but his huge shoulders stuck fast. St. Nicholas covered the hogshead, leaving the giant sticking fast in the pickle barrel, and that was the end of the giant. Then St. Nicholas uncovered the barrel in the corner in which he had seen the butcher and the giant looking in when he had first entered the shop. There were 2 children standing on their heads in the pickle, with their feet sticking out at the top. He caught them by the legs and pulled them out, and by his magic power, he soon brought them back to life. He gave them food and warmed them by the fire, and soon they were none the worse for their hour in the barrel of brine. Then he gave them meat and brought them back to their grandmother, and they made broth for her and soon made her well, and they were all happy again. And the land was troubled no more by giants, for St. Nicholas never again allowed great harm to come to little children, if they always kept his whistle near them and blew softly upon it when they were in trouble or distress. The end. Oh, I like that story. The children just get saved in the end by old Saint Nick, just in the nick of time. This tale also might be why my trivia mate Brian doesn't like pickles. I like this story, and I hope you're all having a wonderful holiday season. I will be exchanging cash with my family in lieu of gifts, because cash is better than a gift card. It's just kind of Korean style. The podcast Shoutout is to the Vocal Fries. This show battles linguistic bigotry and is a great place to learn about folks who don't speak like you. And the listener shout-out is to Omaha, Nebraska, traditional lands of the Omaha people. I would love to go and see the site of the house where the future leader, Malcolm X, aka Detroit Red, was born. And so I say in Omaha to my listener, and please pardon my poor grammar, Awa Aze Handan. Thank you, and good night.